The first thing that hit me when I pushed open that door wasn't the smell, it was the silence. Heavy, stale silence, like it had been waiting on me. My Uncle James' house hadn't seen life in years, not since his heart gave out. Dust hung in the air like it was part of the wallpaper, clinging to the cracked molding, the sagging curtains. I stepped inside and the floor moaned, same way it used to when I was a boy, sneaking cookies from his kitchen. 42 years old, divorced, and half a father to kids who barely called. This was not how I thought life would circle back. My uncle didn't have children, so the house fell to me, the nephew he used to let nap on the couch during Sunday football. Now here I was, suitcase in hand, trying to convince myself it was a blessing and not just another weight. I dragged my palm across the banister, feeling the grit grind under my skin. The smell of old wood, mildew, and something faintly sweet, maybe rotting fruit left behind, sat thick in my nose. A part of me wanted to turn around, close the door, and leave the place to collapse on itself. But there's something about grief. It doesn't just pull you backward. It dares you to stay and wrestle with what's left. Everywhere I looked, I saw echoes of what I'd lost. My marriage, gone after years of shouting matches that chipped us into strangers. My kids, living with their mother, reaching out when it was convenient, not because they needed me. And now Uncle James, the man who taught me how to throw a football, how to change oil, how to listen when you didn't have words. I wandered into the living room, brushing cobwebs aside, and that's when I saw it. The sofa. Faded brown fabric, cushions slumped in on themselves, but still standing in the same spot it always had. I froze. That couch had carried the weight of every Thanksgiving nap, every playoff game, every long talk with my uncle when the world outside felt too loud. For a second, the grief let up, and warmth touched me again, like I could still hear him laughing at the TV. But the longer I stared, the stranger it felt. The house was falling apart, plaster crumbling, windows rattling, but that sofa held its ground. My throat tightened. Maybe it was foolish, but something in me decided right then I'd start with the sofa. Fixing it up would be like fixing myself, one layer at a time. The next morning, I dragged the sofa closer to the window where the light could find it. Sunlight caught the dust in the air, turning it into a storm of tiny flecks that settled on my clothes and skin. I coughed, grabbed a rag, and set my coffee mug down on the warped floorboard beside me. The fabric was worse than I remembered, ripped at the seams, stained with years of sweat, grease, maybe even spilled whiskey. Still, as my fingers traced the armrest, I could see flashes of my childhood. Me curled up with a blanket after a snowball fight. Uncle James hollering at the bears for blowing another lead. My cousins piled on top of me, kicking their shoes off and laughing until my stomach hurt. That sofa had held the whole family once. I pulled out a screwdriver, sat cross-legged, and started stripping away the layers. Each staple I yanked free echoed too loud in that quiet room. Underneath, the wood frame was scarred but sturdy. That gave me hope. The world had taken swings at me too. Divorce papers, missed birthdays, nights alone in my shop, pretending work was enough. But my bones were still solid. Maybe this old thing and I weren't so different. The more I worked, the calmer I felt. It wasn't just about furniture anymore. I was tired of walking through my life feeling like a broken thing people tossed aside. Maybe I couldn't stitch my marriage back together, Maybe I couldn't be in my kids' lives the way I wanted. But here, with this sofa, I could mend something. I thought about how black families have always been good at making do. Hand-me-down clothes, Sunday dinners stretched out with whatever was in the pantry, a cracked table polished until it shined like new. Restoration wasn't a luxury, it was survival. We fixed things not because we had extra time or money, but because throwing them away meant throwing away pieces of ourselves. By the time I pulled off the last cushion, my shirt was damp with sweat, my hands raw. I sat back and looked at the bare frame, just bones waiting for new skin. I should have felt tired, but instead, there was this steady fire in me. I whispered, "We gonna get through this." Could have been talking to the sofa or to myself. What I didn't know was that healing often unearths more than scars.
The rain had started tapping against the window by the time I got back to work on the sofa. The rhythm was steady, almost like it was pushing me forward. I leaned in with my screwdriver, prying out rusted springs and clearing away clumps of mildew-stained batting. Every movement stirred up more dust, and the musty smell clung to my throat until I had to swallow hard. I was deep in it, focused, almost peaceful, when the tip of my screwdriver snagged. Not on wood, not on wire. Something harder, metallic. I frowned, dug my fingers in, and tugged until the object gave a little. What I pulled free made my stomach twist. It was a small black device, about the size of my palm. A camera. The lens scratched but intact, and worse, it had a tiny red light still blinking. For a second I just sat there, frozen, my heart hammering in my ears. Dust coated my tongue, and the rain outside suddenly felt louder, like the house itself was holding its breath. This wasn't some kid's toy, wasn't some forgotten trinket. It was modern, sharp-edged, and deliberate. I turned it over in my hands, the weight of it pressing into me. My uncle's sofa, the place that had been comfort and laughter, had been watching, recording, maybe for years. I felt my throat close. Who had put it there? And why? I stood up fast, pacing the room, every creak in the floor sounding like footsteps behind me. My mind scrambled back through memories, family dinners, Sunday naps, arguments whispered after holidays. Had someone been listening to all of it? The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was heavy with questions. I set the camera down on the coffee table, staring at that blinking light like it could see straight through me. My hands trembled, and I shoved them into my pockets to steady myself. This wasn't about nostalgia or repair anymore. This was intrusion, surveillance, and I had the sinking feeling the sofa still had more to reveal.
I didn't sleep that night. The blinking red light from that camera sat in my mind even after I unplugged it and shoved it into an old shoebox. Every creak in the house felt like a warning. Every shift of the wind outside made me tense. By morning, my eyes burned from staring at the ceiling, waiting for something else to surface. Coffee in hand, I forced myself back to the sofa. If there was one device hidden, maybe there was more. My stomach was tight, like I was peeling back layers of my uncle's life instead of just upholstery. The air smelled of damp wood and rust. I pried deeper into the frame, pulling loose nails and splinters until my knuckles stung. That's when I felt it again, the catch of something unnatural. I eased it out slowly. This time it wasn't a camera. It was a recorder. Slim, metal, scratched up, but still intact. I turned it over, and, almost without thinking, slid the switch to play. Static filled the room, sharp enough to make me wince. Then it broke into voices. Two men, their tones low and hard. "You running out of time, James." My chest tightened. "You got the money or not?" And then my uncle. His voice. Rougher than I remembered, but unmistakable. I just need more time. Please. I'm working on it." I dropped into the nearest chair, legs weak. Hearing him beg like that tore something open in me. This was the man who'd taught me to stand tall, who'd told me never to fold under pressure. But here he was on tape, pleading. The voices on the other end weren't moved. "No more time. You don't pay, you know what happens." Silence followed, long and suffocating, before the tape clicked off. I sat there, recorder heavy in my hand, my skin clammy. Uncle James had been in trouble, real trouble, and no one in the family had known. He'd carried it alone, worn it under his smile, swallowed it down at Sunday dinners. I wiped sweat from my forehead, the room spinning just a little. My uncle hadn't died from just a weak heart. He'd been crushed under pressure no one else could see. And if this was only one file, what else had he left behind?
By the next evening, I couldn't look at the house the same. Every shadow felt loaded. Every creak had me snapping my head around. I'd stuffed the camera and recorder into my duffel, but knowing they'd come from inside this place made me restless. The worst part was replaying one line from the recording. One of those men had said, almost like a joke, "The sofa isn't the only thing watching." That sentence crawled under my skin. I started scanning the house, moving from room to room with a flashlight, even though the sun was still up. I yanked down the smoke detector, pried open the back. Nothing. I unscrewed the vent cover in the hallway, ran my hand along the metal. Clean. In the kitchen, I opened every cupboard, tapped the walls, listening for something hollow. My pulse thudded in my ears. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old grease from the stove. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, hoping it would take the edge off. But even that burned sharp instead of softening me. My hand shook when I set the glass down. By midnight, I was sitting in the living room with the lights off, staring at the dark outlines of the furniture. The silence wasn't comforting anymore. It pressed against me, alive, like the house was holding its secrets tight. I thought about my uncle moving through these same rooms, carrying that weight alone. Maybe he'd heard the same creaks, felt the same eyes on him. Maybe he'd sat right where I was, whiskey in hand, trying to swallow the fear. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, whispering into the dark. "What were you caught up in, Uncle?" My breath fogged in the chill air, and the house gave nothing back. That was when another detail from the tape came rushing back to me. A single word that hadn't meant anything at first, but now refused to let go. The shed. The shed sat in the far corner of the yard, half hidden by overgrown weeds and a leaning oak that dropped acorns onto its tin roof. I hadn't been out there since I first arrived. Something about the way it slouched, paint peeling, padlock rusted shut, made it look like it was keeping its mouth closed on purpose. But after what I'd heard on that recorder, I couldn't ignore it. The men had mentioned the shed and a suitcase. "When he cracks," one voice had said. My uncle hadn't cracked. He'd carried it until his heart gave out. Or maybe they helped it along. I shoved the key ring I'd found in his junk drawer into my pocket and stepped outside. The grass was damp with dew, soaking the cuffs of my jeans.
The evening air carried the sharp bite of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. My hands were already clammy before I reached the door. The first 3 keys didn't fit. The fourth turned with a groan. I pulled the door open and the smell hit me first. Oil, dust, and something sour underneath, like old sweat. Tools lined the wall, neat and orderly, the way my uncle had always kept them. But in the corner, under a tarp, sat a battered suitcase. My chest clenched. I dragged it into the light spilling through the doorway. The zipper teeth were rusted, but with a hard tug it gave. Inside were papers, stacks of them. Bills, bank notices, letters with threats spelled out between lines of legal talk. And beneath those, photographs. Blurry shots of my uncle at the grocery store, at church, sitting on this very porch. Every angle told the same story. He was being watched. I slammed the case shut, bile rising in my throat. He hadn't died in peace. He died in fear, cornered until his body quit. I stumbled back into the yard, gulping the cool air, rage burning through me. For a moment, I wanted to torch the whole place, let the shed and everything in it turn to ash. But another part of me knew that wouldn't end it. This wasn't weight I could carry alone. Sometimes strength means fixing things with your hands, but sometimes it means looking someone in the eye and saying, "I need help." And that's how I found myself driving to the sheriff's office.
The sheriff's office smelled like burnt coffee and damp uniforms. I sat across from Detective Harris, a tall brother with salt at his temples and eyes that studied me like he'd heard it all before. I placed the shoebox on the desk, slid it toward him. Inside, the camera, the recorder, and the transmitter I'd pried from the sofa frame. He didn't touch them right away, just leaned forward, his chair creaking, and asked, "You sure you want to put this on record?" I nodded, though my stomach flipped. They were in my uncle's house. And there's more. A suitcase in the shed. My voice cracked, and I hated how small it sounded. He finally opened the box, lifted the recorder with a pen, and pressed play. The static filled the room, then the voices, the threats, my uncle's plea. I watched Harris's jaw tighten. He didn't stop the tape until the end. When he did, he exhaled slow. "This ain't no amateur job. These are professional. Black market surveillance gear. We've been tracking groups running extortion schemes around here, but I didn't expect..." He shook his head. Hearing him say that sent a jolt through me. Part of me felt relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining shadows in every corner. Another part of me wanted to throw up. If this was bigger than my uncle, then stepping into it had just painted a target on me, too. I rubbed my hands together, knuckles raw from tearing through upholstery. So what happens now? We open an investigation, and we check that shed. I swallowed hard. The idea of going back there with them made my skin crawl, but it also felt like the first time someone else was carrying the weight. For weeks, I'd been alone with dust, silence, and ghosts of my uncle's fear. Now there was proof in someone else's hands. Walking out of that office, the autumn air cut sharp against my face. I should have felt lighter. But the truth is, once you let the truth out, it's no longer just yours to hold. And safety doesn't come overnight.
When they searched the shed, I stood off to the side with my arms folded, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. The officers carried out more boxes than I expected. Folders, ledgers, even a burner phone with numbers saved under nicknames like Collector and Boss. Harris gave me a nod, not triumphant, but heavy, like even justice was a burden. Word spread faster than I imagined. Neighbors who'd barely waved before started showing up at my porch. Some brought casseroles, others brought stories about how my uncle had slipped them cash when times were tight, how he'd fixed their cars and never asked for more than a handshake. Their voices carried pride, but also guilt. None of them had known the kind of pressure he'd been under. None of us had. Inside, I dragged that old sofa out to the curb. The wood creaked one last time as it scraped across the floorboards. I stood over it for a long moment, staring at the faded cushions, the seams where the secrets had been stitched in. My chest ached. That couch had been the center of my childhood, and now it was the grave of truths I wished I'd never uncovered. A delivery truck dropped off a new sofa that afternoon. Gray, firm, nothing special, but it was clean, untouched. I set it against the wall, opened the window to let the autumn air roll through, and sat down. The house still felt like it was listening, but for the first time, it wasn't just fear in the silence. It was possibility. I won't lie. I still check the locks twice before bed. I still pause at shadows in the corner of my eye. Trauma doesn't just pack up and leave because you want it to. But the house is mine now. Each nail I hammer, each wall I paint, I claim a little more of it back from the silence. Sometimes healing doesn't mean erasing scars. It means carrying them with enough strength that they don't carry you. I leaned back, let the quiet settle, and whispered into the stillness, "I'm not running." The house stayed quiet, and that was enough.